There are significant new developments in the mysterious death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells that we want to talk about tonight.
The investigation is far from over. The death of Nolan Wells, and the question is, was this an accident or was this a crime?
Three people have now described Nolan Wells' plan for getting off Horn Island on July 4th. Three different plans. The friend said he chose to stay behind for a girl. The girl says he told her he was heading back to their boat. And a third witness, never mentioned in this case until this week, says Nolan told him something different from both of those accounts entirely. He said he was catching a ride home with another group of friends all together. Nobody has reconciled these three versions. And now the FBI is investigating something else this case has produced. Threats against the people caught inside that contradiction. Scubber. Hit that bell. For weeks, she was simply a girl in the account investigators had been given. This week, the Daily Mail identified her. Katie McCormack, 19 years old. According to the account the three friends gave investigators, Nolan chose to remain on Horn Island specifically to continue talking with her after the group's boat developed mechanical problems and prepared to head back to the mainland. That has functioned as the explanation for why he was not aboard when the boat left. McCormack's sister Gracie disputed that account publicly, saying Katie understood Nolan intended to get back on the boat, not stay behind with her. Two versions, direct contradiction. That much has already reshaped how this case is understood. What has not been widely reported is a third account, one that does not simply contradict the other two, but introduces an entirely separate explanation nobody had previously put forward. Ashley Cole is a Mississippi judge whose family has been connected to this case since its earliest days. Her son was among those who traveled to Horn Island with Nolan on July 4th. Cole has said publicly that her son, Warren, spoke with Nolan around 3 p.m. that afternoon. According to Cole, Nolan told Warren at that time that he intended to get a boat home with a different group of friends entirely. Not McCormack, not the boat the original three friends were on. A separate group, a separate vessel, plan that does not appear in either of the two accounts that have dominated public attention. Judge Cole's family has been in an unusual position throughout this case. Her son was present on the island, present in the friend group whose account has been repeatedly challenged, and now the source of a detail that complicates that same account further, rather than reinforcing it. If Cole's account of what her son told her is accurate, it means Nolan communicated at least two distinct plans within a relatively short window that afternoon. Whatever he told Warren around 3 p.m. about a different group's boat, and whatever came later, either staying with McCormack or intending to rejoin his original group, depending on which of the other two accounts is accurate. If accurate, that detail means the investigation is not working with two conflicting stories about Nolan's final hours. It is working with three. One in which he stayed for a girl, one in which he intended to return to the original boat, and one in which, hours before anyone realized he was missing, he told a friend he had an entirely different transportation plan that involved neither. None of these three accounts can be dismissed outright. People change plans across an afternoon. Someone can tell a friend at 3 p.m. that they intend to catch a ride with one group, then have circumstances change by 4:30 p.m., leading to a different decision entirely. Talking with McCormack, intending to rejoin the original boat, or something else not yet accounted for in any version currently on the record, but three separate, specific, named accounts of Nolan's stated intentions that afternoon, each attributed to a different person, each pointing toward a different outcome, is not a minor inconsistency investigators can wave away as ordinary confusion. It means that at some point between roughly 3 p.m. and whenever the boat carrying his friends actually departed, Nolan Wells' own stated plans changed at least once, possibly twice, or someone's account of what he said is not accurate. Determining which of those explanations is correct requires exactly the kind of digital timeline reconstruction, phone records, location data, message timestamps that federal investigators have been building for weeks. It also requires something this case has struggled to produce cleanly: consistent, fully cooperative accounts from every person who spoke with Nolan that day, delivered without the complications that individual legal representation and public hostility have since introduced. That hostility is not abstract. It has become its own federal investigation. Mississippi Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tindell confirmed this week that the FBI is investigating threats made against people connected to this case. Public officials, potential witnesses, and members of Nolan's own family. When you make those types of threats against public officials, against possible witnesses, and against the folks that are involved in this investigation and the family, Tindell said, then you are also committing a criminal act, and that's going to be taken very, very seriously. Tindell attributed much of the hostility to what he described as false information circulating online about how Nolan died. Information, he said, has stirred up rage and emotion, translating into direct threats against real people. The word witnesses in Tindell's statement now carries specific weight given what this week has revealed. Katie McCormack is a witness. Warren Cole is a witness. The three friends who traveled with Nolan are witnesses. Every one of them, by virtue of having spoken to Nolan Wells on July 4th, has become a person whose account matters to a federal investigation, and, simultaneously, a potential target for exactly the kind of threat Tindell says the FBI is now taking seriously. That creates a specific chilling effect worth naming directly. A witness who fears public backlash for their account has every incentive to say less, not more, to hedge, to let an attorney speak on their behalf rather than answer questions themselves. If threats are shaping how freely these witnesses are willing to cooperate, the threats investigation and the death investigation are not actually separate matters. However, the FBI's organizational chart divides them. They are feeding into each other, one making the other harder to complete cleanly. Real people who, in some cases, teenagers and young adults who happened to be present on an island on July 4th and are now receiving threats serious enough to draw a federal investigation of their own. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves entered this dispute publicly, accusing civil rights attorney Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton of fueling division around the case. Reeves did not, according to available reporting, provide specific evidence connecting either figure directly to the threats Tindell described. His criticism centered on the broader tone and national attention the case has drawn since Crump and Sharpton became involved. That is a familiar dynamic in cases that attract sustained civil rights attention. A state official framing outside advocacy as the source of division, while the family's advocates frame their involvement as the only reason the case has received scrutiny at all. Both framings can be sincerely held. Both also serve the interests of the people advancing them. State officials benefit from a narrative that treats the case as adequately handled and unfairly politicized, while advocacy attorneys benefit from a narrative that treats sustained pressure as the only thing preventing the case from being quietly closed. That framing has drawn its own pushback. Congressman Andre Carson, Democrat from Indiana, accused Mississippi officials of failing to provide transparency to Nolan's family. Not only are they suffering the unimaginable grief of losing a child, Carson said, referring to Nolan's parents, they're not getting the truth, transparency, or accountability. Carson's intervention adds a member of Congress to a dispute that, until this point, had largely been contained to state officials, a civil rights attorney, and a national civil rights organization. His statement did not simply echo the family's frustration. It specifically criticized the state's handling of physical evidence a claim with forensic implications that go beyond political rhetoric. Two elected officials describing the same set of facts, reaching opposite conclusions about where responsibility lies. Reeves points toward the activist amplifying the case. Carson points toward the state officials he says have withheld information the family is entitled to. Both positions are now part of the public record surrounding a case that, before this week, primarily a forensic and eyewitness mystery, it has become simultaneously a political one. The independent autopsy commissioned by Nolan's family has returned results that do not resolve the underlying mystery. The findings were described as inconclusive, not pointing definitively toward foul play, and not ruling it out either. A separate forensic assessment reviewed by outside experts characterized the physical evidence as not indicating foul play, according to a former medical examiner who examined the findings. That assessment exists alongside the independent pathologist's own more cautious language that non-accidental factors could not be entirely excluded based on the evidence available to him. Two characterizations of the same underlying forensic picture, emphasizing different sides of the same uncertainty. Neither has produced a determined cause of death. Neither has been matched against a confirmed, single, non-contradictory account of what actually happened to Nolan between the early afternoon and whenever he entered the water. Congressman Carson's specific complaint focused on something concrete, that Mississippi officials had retained some of Nolan's body parts, leaving the independent autopsy conducted on his family's behalf without complete access to examine everything a full forensic review would require. That detail connects directly to the credibility questions surrounding all three accounts of Nolan's final hours. If the forensic evidence itself is incomplete, missing structures the state medical examiner's office has not released or explained, then reconciling the three competing witness accounts becomes even more dependent on evidence that does not currently exist in complete form anywhere outside Mississippi's own custody. The FBI's digital evidence examination, the threats investigation, and the incomplete forensic picture are now three separate federal or quasi-federal processes running in parallel, each addressing a different piece of a case that started as a single question. What happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island? Katie McCormack has not been accused of any wrongdoing. Warren Cole has not been accused of any wrongdoing. The three friends who traveled with Nolan have not been charged with any crime. Every person whose account now forms part of this shifting, three-version timeline is, as of this week, simply a witness, someone whose statement matters to investigators trying to determine what actually happened, not someone facing legal jeopardy for what they have said. But witnesses in high-profile cases increasingly face a different kind of jeopardy, the kind Tyndall's comments were specifically addressing: threats. Online hostility serious enough to draw federal investigators away from the underlying death investigation and into a parallel inquiry about who is threatening the people whose only connection to this case is that they spoke to Nolan Wells or were with him on the last day anyone saw him alive. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. He told at least three different people three different things about his plans on July 4th. According to those people's own accounts, none of which have been fully reconciled, he did not come home. His independent autopsy is inconclusive. His case has produced a federal threats investigation running alongside the federal death investigation. And the state of Mississippi and the family's own attorney cannot agree on who is responsible for the fact that 3 weeks later, none of this has been resolved. If you have any real information about Nolan Wells' death, contact investigators directly.tips.fbi.gov or 1-800-CALL-FBI. The combined reward is $100,000 Scuspear. Hit that bell. Three accounts of his final afternoon. 3 different plans. 1 federal investigation into what happened to him. Now a second federal investigation into the threats against the people who might know. Neither has produced an answer yet.